Gold doesn't just corrupt the soul, it blinds the eye to truth. In the rush for riches, men forget that the heaviest burdens are not stone, but secrets and lies. The stagecoach groaned to a halt, its wheels finally surrendering to the thick dust of Deadwood's main street. Bridget O'Connell pressed her face to the grimy window, the weathered photograph of Arthur Pendleton clutched in her hand. His letters, filled with promises of a secure future far from the famine-scarred fields of Ireland, felt thin and fragile now. The air that greeted her was not the damp, green scent of home, but a dry, alien mixture of sawdust, cheap whiskey, and sweat. This was it. The start of her new life. A life she had crossed an ocean for. As Bridget stepped onto the rough-hewn boardwalk in her simple wool travel dress, a hush fell over the street. Gruff miners paused, their gazes lingering on her fiery red hair. Women peered from behind curtains, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. A lone woman was a spectacle, an anomaly in this raw masculine world. She clutched her single suitcase, her knuckles white, and walked toward the hotel, feeling like an actress on a stage she had never wished to tread. Each step echoed the daunting reality of her isolation in this untamed land. Inside the Grand Central Hotel, a man with a tired face and a tin star on his vest approached her, blocking her path to the front desk. "Miss O'Connell?" he asked, his voice low and devoid of welcome. She nodded, a hopeful smile faltering on her lips. He took off his hat, revealing a balding head. "I'm Sheriff Roscoe. I'm afraid I have some terrible news for you, ma'am." He paused, his gaze dropping to the floor. "There's no easy way to say this. Mr. Pendleton, he was found dead in his office this morning. It appears to have been a killing." The sheriff's words hung in the air, sharp and cold as ice. The noise of the hotel lobby faded into a dull roar in Bridget's ears. Her dream, so vividly painted in Arthur's letters, shattered into 1,000 pieces. She felt a profound emptiness, a void where hope had been just moments before. He led her to a small, stark room, and the closing of the door sounded like a final judgment. She sank onto the thin mattress, her suitcase unopened at her feet. She was a stranger, a widow before she was ever a wife, utterly and terrifyingly alone at the edge of the world. Sheriff Roscoe wasted no time. Before the sun had even reached its zenith, he stood on the hotel steps, addressing a small, murmuring crowd. "We have our man," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of false authority. "Tatanka, the Lakota hand who worked for Pendleton." He let the name hang in the air, allowing prejudice to do his work for him. They were seen arguing just 2 days ago over a land survey. Seems the argument ended badly for Mr. Pendleton. A grim satisfaction settled over the faces in the crowd. It was a simple, ugly story they were all too willing to believe. To solidify his case, Roscoe produced a small, sharp object wrapped in a handkerchief. It was a flint arrowhead, cleanly made. "Found this right beside the body," he declared. Lakota craftsmanship, unmistakable. He ignored the fact that identical arrowheads were sold as trinkets in the general store. The crowd didn't care. The sight of it was enough. The murmurs grew louder, turning into a low growl of consensus. The verdict had been delivered on the street, long before any trial could be held. Tatanka was already a condemned man in their eyes. Out of a strange sense of duty, or perhaps pity, the sheriff allowed Bridget into the scene of the crime. The office was heavy with the scent of whiskey and the metallic tang of death. While Roscoe pointed out the overturned chair and scattered papers as signs of a struggle, Bridget's gaze swept the room. Her eyes, accustomed to the fine details of Irish lace-making, caught something he had missed. A faint, damp outline of a boot print on the rug near the window. It was the distinct, sharp-heeled mark of an expensive town boot, not the soft, rounded shape of a moccasin. The image of that boot print haunted her. It was a single, discordant note in the sheriff's simple, brutal song. Back in the suffocating silence of her hotel room, Bridget replayed the scene in her mind. Roscoe's confident pronouncements, the crowd's hungry agreement, and the quiet, damning evidence on the floor. A cold dread seeped into her heart, chilling her far more than her grief. She realized with terrifying clarity that Arthur's killer was not only free, but was likely watching as an innocent man was being hunted to take his place. Justice here was a mirage in the dust. The next morning, two figures of civic importance visited her. Pastor Evans and Mrs. Thornton, the banker's wife, a woman draped in black silk and solemnity. "My dear child," Mrs. Thornton began, her voice dripping with pity. "A terrible tragedy. We've taken the liberty of collecting funds for your safe passage back east. This wilderness is no place for a grieving woman alone." The pastor nodded in agreement. "It is the Lord's mercy to see you safely away from this godless place. You should take the morning stagecoach." Bridget listened politely, her hands folded in her lap. They saw a fragile, broken thing to be shipped back home like damaged goods. They didn't see the stubborn fire she inherited from a long line of Irish survivors. The thought of running away while an innocent man was hunted for a crime he didn't commit churned in her stomach. "Thank you for your charity," she said, her voice steady and clear. "But I cannot leave. I believe I will remain in Deadwood for the time being." The shock on their faces was a small, satisfying victory. That night, seeking a connection to the man she was meant to marry, Bridget reread Arthur's letters by the faint light of an oil lamp. His early script was bold and full of hope, but the last letter, written only a week ago, was different. The handwriting was hurried, anxious. "The discovery is beyond my wildest dreams, Bridget," he wrote. "But a shadow has fallen over it. My partner, Silas Thornton, has a hunger that I fear this gold cannot satisfy. I see it in his eyes." Silas Thornton. The banker's husband. The man whose wife had just tried to send her away. Bridget stood at the window, the letter trembling in her hand. The pieces clicked into place with chilling certainty. The boot print, the rush to blame Tatanka, the effort to get her out of town. She looked past the dusty street, her gaze fixing on the dark, jagged silhouette of the distant mountains against the star-dusted sky. The black hills. Pahasapa. The source of the gold and the heart of the secret. A quiet vow formed in her heart. She wasn't just staying. She was going to uncover the truth, no matter what it cost her. Finding Tatanka felt like trying to catch smoke. He had vanished into the sprawling wilderness that bordered the town, a place where the law of Deadwood held no sway. Ignoring the scandalized whispers that followed her, Bridget purchased a sturdy horse and rode out alone. The townspeople saw a foolish woman courting disaster, but she was driven by a conviction that burned brighter than their judgment. She rode toward the cottonwood trees that marked the edge of the Lakota encampment, her heart a tight knot of fear and resolve. He emerged from the trees as silently as a shadow. One moment she was alone, the next he was there, standing in her path, blocking her way. Tatanka was tall and lean, his face a mask of stern concentration, his dark eyes holding a deep, weary anger. His hand rested lightly on the handle of a knife sheathed at his belt. He said nothing, simply watching her, his posture radiating a defiant distrust that made it clear he expected a threat. To him, she was just another white face, another harbinger of trouble and broken promises. Bridget's horse shifted nervously, but she held its reins and her own fear steady. "I'm not here to accuse you," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "My name is Bridget O'Connell. I was to be Arthur Pendleton's wife." His expression didn't change. "They found an arrowhead, but I saw something else. In the office. A boot print. The heel was narrow, like a townsman's, not the mark of a moccasin." She looked directly into his guarded eyes, offering him the only truth she had. "I don't believe you killed him." For the first time, a flicker of something other than hostility crossed Tatanka's face. It was surprise, sharp and profound. He had expected accusations, perhaps a bounty hunter's trick, but not this. Not a white woman risking everything to speak a quiet truth on his behalf. He studied her then, seeing not just her pale skin and strange green eyes, but the fierce sincerity within them. He lowered his hand from his knife. The air between them, once thick with tension, now held a fragile, unspoken question. The hunt for justice had just gained an unlikely ally. Tatanka led her away from the main path into a secluded grove of aspens, their leaves trembling in the breeze. "Your words are unexpected," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Why would you, his intended—" Seek to clear the name of a Lakota man. Bridget met his gaze. Because the truth matters more than what is easy. His stern expression softened slightly. The argument was real, he admitted. But it was not about taking the land. It was about how to honor it. Arthur found something in our sacred hills, the Pahasapa. Something men kill for. Gold, Bridget whispered, the word tasting like ash. Tatanka nodded grimly. Arthur had a good heart. He wanted to make a formal treaty with my elders, to share the wealth and protect the sacred sites. But his partner, he has a soul full of greed. He paused, letting the name fall with weight. Silas Thornton. The name confirmed everything. Thornton wanted to drive my people out, to claim all of it for himself. He called Arthur a fool for wanting to deal honorably with us. That is what we argued about. Honor. A pact was sealed there, in the quiet shade of the whispering aspens. They were a strange pair, the Irish mail-order bride and the hunted Lakota warrior. I can ask questions in town, Bridget offered. People talk to a grieving woman. They won't suspect me. Tatanka agreed. Arthur was a careful man. If Thornton threatened him, he would have hidden his maps, his proof. I knew his habits. I will search his places outside of town. They agreed to meet at an abandoned stable on the edge of Deadwood, a neutral ground between their two warring worlds. That night, in the dusty, moonlit stable, the air was thick with the scent of old hay and shared secrets. They spoke in low tones, planning their next steps. In the dim light, they were not a white woman and a native man, but simply two people trapped in a dangerous game, their lives hanging by a thread of trust. An unspoken understanding passed between them, a recognition of the lonely courage each saw in the other. For a brief moment, the immense gulf between their worlds seemed to shrink, replaced by a fragile, powerful connection. The Deadwood night was a cloak of velvet, pierced only by a million stars and the lonely yellow lamps of the saloons. Bridget and Tatanka moved through the alley behind Arthur's office, their footsteps muffled by the dust. A single light burned inside where a night watchman sat. "It falls to you," Tatanka whispered, his voice a low breath in her ear. "They will see a woman in mourning, not a conspirator." Her heart hammered against her ribs as she walked into the light, arranging her face into a mask of sorrow to approach the guard. "Excuse me, sir," Bridget began, her voice trembling convincingly. "I know it is terribly late. I just couldn't sleep. I hoped I might be able to sit in his office for a moment, to feel close to him one last time." The watchman, a weary old man, looked at her with pity. As he grumbled his assent and unlocked the door for her, Tatanka moved like a breath of wind, slipping through the unlocked back window he had identified earlier. He landed inside without a sound, his senses on high alert in the stagnant, shadowed room. Inside, Tatanka's skilled hands quickly found the loose board beneath the desk Arthur had once shown him, a place for hiding personal valuables. Beneath it lay a small, leather-bound journal. He had just pulled it out when Bridget slipped back in, closing the door softly behind her. By the faint moonlight filtering through the window, they opened it. Arthur's frantic script filled the page. "ST grows more impatient. He calls the Lakota obstacles. Today he said if I would not take the gold by force, he would do it without me. I fear for my life." Then, a sound. The heavy tread of boots on the boardwalk outside. There was no time to think. Tatanka grabbed Bridget's arm, pulling her toward the heavy velvet curtains covering the street-facing window. They pressed themselves flat into the deep shadows as the office door swung open. Silas Thornton strode into the room, his large frame filling the doorway, his face a mask of grim purpose. He lit a lamp, flooding the office with light. Trapped, inches from the man they knew was a killer, Bridget could feel the solid warmth of Tatanka beside her, their breaths held, their hearts pounding in unison in the terrifying silence. After Thornton left, empty-handed and furious, they escaped into the night, the journal clutched in Bridget's hands. A final entry gave them their destination. "I have moved the maps and assays to the old hunting cabin near the rock formation they call the Eagle's Beak. It is safe there. The Pahasapa will protect it." Tatanka knew the place. "It is deep in the hills," he warned. "The journey is not easy. The land does not welcome everyone." But Bridget's resolve was firm. "Then you must teach me how to be welcomed," she replied. They set out at dawn. The moment they left the dusty plains behind and entered the pine-scented air of the Black Hills, Tatanka seemed to transform. He moved with a quiet confidence, his senses attuned to the world around him. He taught Bridget to read the stories written on the forest floor, the tracks of deer, the passage of a coyote. He showed her which berries were safe to eat and which roots held water. He spoke of the land not as a resource to be conquered, but as a living entity deserving of respect. She watched him, fascinated by this deep, unfamiliar wisdom. In turn, Bridget shared her own stories. As they rested by a clear, bubbling creek, she spoke of the green, rolling hills of County Clare, a land also steeped in ancient folklore and reverence for the unseen. She described the fairy forts and the respect her people had for the old ways. Tatanka listened intently, a rare smile touching his lips. "Your people remember the land," he said. "The white men who come here have forgotten. They see only what they can take." In that shared understanding, a new level of intimacy grew between them. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, they sat by a small, crackling fire. The vast silence of the hills enveloped them. In the firelight, the weariness and suspicion in Tatanka's eyes had been replaced by a quiet warmth. He looked at Bridget, at the way the light caught the red in her hair. She looked back, seeing not a hunted fugitive, but a man of profound strength and gentleness. No words were exchanged, but a powerful current passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of a bond that now ran deeper than their shared mission. The cabin was nestled under the shadow of the rock formation, nearly invisible against the gray stone. It was small, dusty, and smelled of pine needles and disuse. After a tense search, Tatanka's hand found a loose stone in the hearth. Beneath it was a small metal box. His knife pried open the rusted lock. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried leaves, were rolled maps, several small cloth bags, and a few loose pages torn from Arthur's journal. They had found it. The heart of the secret lay before them in a simple, metal box. Bridget carefully unrolled the last journal entry, her hands trembling. The words, written in a shaky hand, were a cold testament to Arthur's final hours. Thornton was here. He demanded the maps. He said the gold was his by right, and that no treaty with so-called savages would stand in his way. I refused. He is coming back tonight. I know now he does not intend to leave me alive to argue the point. It was an unequivocal confession, a voice from the grave pointing directly at the man who smiled from behind the banker's counter. A wave of relief washed over Bridget, but it was followed by a bitter tide of grief. She picked up one of the small bags. It was heavy, and through the worn fabric, she could feel the sharp edges of the ore within. This was it, the source of her promised new life. It wasn't a blessing. It was a curse that had lured Arthur to his death and would now stain the hands of all who touched it. She held the rock that had cost a man his life, and the cold weight of it seemed to settle directly into her soul, extinguishing the last flicker of her Irish dreams. Tatanka did not look at the gold. His gaze was fixed out the small, dirty window toward the sacred peaks of the Pahasapa. "You have cleared my name," he said, his voice low and heavy with a sorrow that went beyond their immediate victory. "But you have also condemned my home." Bridget looked at him confused. "This proof," he explained, "this yellow rock, it will bring 1,000 more Thorntons. They will come with shovels and dynamite, and they will not stop until they have torn the heart out of these hills." The truth was a double-edged blade. Their journey back was heavy with the weight of their discovery. The joy of finding proof was overshadowed by the grim reality of what it meant. As they navigated a narrow canyon pass, the familiar landscape suddenly felt menacing. Tatanka stopped abruptly, his body tensed. He held up a hand for silence, his eyes scanning the rocky ridges above them. "We are not alone," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind whistling through the rocks. The scent of danger was sharp in the air. The hunter had become the hunted. The first shot cracked through the silence, a bullet whining past Bridget's head and smacking into the rock beside her. More shots followed, echoing off the canyon walls. "Get down!" Tatanka yelled, shoving her behind a cluster of large boulders. Peeking over the edge, he saw them. Silas Thornton, high on a ridge, flanked by 3 hired men with rifles. They were trapped. Thornton, realizing his search of the office was fruitless, had correctly guessed their destination and had come to silence them forever. Tatanka fired back with the old rifle he carried, his shots carefully aimed to keep their heads down, not to kill. He was a warrior, but he took no pleasure in ending a life. He provided covering fire, urging Bridget to move from one rock to another, trying to find a safer position. But they were pinned down, outnumbered. Another volley of shots rained down. Bridget saw one of the hired guns take careful aim, not at Tatanka, but directly at her. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Time seemed to stand still. In that frozen moment, Tatanka moved. With a powerful shove, he threw himself in front of her. Bridget heard the sickening thud of the bullet hitting flesh, followed by his sharp intake of breath. He cried out, a sound of pure pain, and collapsed against the rocks, his left shoulder blooming with a dark, wet stain. She screamed his name, a raw, primal sound of terror and fury. The fear that had paralyzed her moments before was instantly burned away by a hot, protective rage she had never known she possessed. "Stay down!" Tatanka gritted out, trying to raise his rifle with one arm. Blood streamed through his fingers. Seeing him wounded, Thornton and his men grew bold, starting to scramble down the rocks for a final confrontation. Bridget's mind raced. Then a memory surfaced, a detail from their hurried search of the cabin. Arthur, a miner, had kept supplies, tucked in a corner behind some old crates. Her eyes darted back toward the cabin, a desperate plan forming in her mind. A gamble born of sheer desperation. "Cover me!" she yelled. And before Tatanka could object, she scrambled from behind the rocks, running a zigzag path back towards the cabin. Bullets kicked up dust around her feet. She dove through the doorway, her hands frantically searching. There, a wooden crate marked danger. She grabbed several sticks of the volatile, earth-shattering powder, her hands not even shaking. She remembered watching miners work, seeing how they cut the fuses. With a piece of broken glass, she cut a short length, her movements quick and precise. She ran back out, the dynamite clutched in her hand. Tatanka was still firing, holding them off, but his strength was failing. From her position, she could see the precarious rock ledge directly above where Thornton and his men were taking cover. She lit the fuse from the embers of their morning campfire. It sputtered to life. With all the strength in her arm, a strength forged by years of farm work in Ireland, she hurled the charge upwards. It landed perfectly on the ledge. The explosion was deafening. It didn't harm the men below, but it sent tons of rock and earth cascading down, a man-made avalanche that sealed the canyon pass completely. Thornton and his men were trapped, their escape route gone, their rifles buried under rubble. When Sheriff Roscoe and his posse arrived, drawn by the sound of the blast, they found a strange scene: a bleeding Lakota man, a determined Irish woman, and the town's most respected banker, sputtering with rage in a cage of his own making. Justice had come to Deadwood, not with a lawman's firearm, but with a woman's courage and a rumble of thunder. The first snows of winter had begun to dust the high peaks of the Pahasapa, blanketing the land in a quiet peace. 6 months had passed since the day Bridget O'Connell's voice had echoed through the streets of Deadwood. The trial of Silas Thornton was swift. Arthur's journal, combined with the testimony of his captured men, sealed his fate. Justice in the end had been absolute. Tatanka's name was officially cleared of all wrongdoing, though the whispers in town only faded to a grudging silence. Bridget was no longer seen as a fragile victim, but as a curiosity, an Irish woman with a will of iron who had stared down the town's most powerful man and won. She was respected by some, feared by others, but she was no longer invisible. The most complicated matter was the gold. As the one who had uncovered the truth, the territorial court granted Bridget control over Arthur Pendleton's claim. She was, for a brief time, the owner of a treasure that could have made her one of the wealthiest women in the Dakota Territory. But she had seen firsthand how the hunger for that yellow rock could poison the soul. In an act that stunned the town's speculators, she met with the elders of Tatanka's tribe. With the help of an honest lawyer from Cheyenne, she drafted a legal document that ceded all mining rights to the specific land mentioned in Arthur's maps back to the Lakota Nation, fulfilling the honorable intention her fiancé had died for. The gold of the Pahasapa would belong to the people who held it sacred. Their own future was a quieter, more personal treaty. Once his shoulder had healed, Tatanka did not return to the life of a wandering ranch hand, and Bridget did not take the stagecoach east. They found they had become each other's home in the midst of the chaos. One evening, standing on the edge of town and looking toward the hills, he spoke. "My world is the open plains and the sacred mountains. Yours is a world of laws and towns." He turned to her, his gaze soft. "I do not know how they can exist as one." Bridget simply placed her hand on his arm. "Then we shall not try to join them," she said gently. "We will build a new one, just for us." And so they did. With the small inheritance left to her by Arthur, they purchased a modest plot of land in a green valley that bordered the Black Hills, a bridge between two worlds. They were married by a traveling judge in a simple ceremony under the wide-open sky. Now standing on the porch of the small, sturdy home they had built together, Bridget watched as Tatanka expertly worked with a young colt in the corral. He looked up and caught her eye, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. She returned it, a feeling of profound peace settling in her heart. She had come to this land, seeking a future promised by a dead man, but had found a truer, deeper love in the heart of the hills.